Hi, Bruce Robinson here. The Indian Ocean tsunami, Boxing Day, 20 years ago, is one of the worst and saddest natural disasters in recorded history. And it hit the headlines around the world, unfolding daily on the evening news. And I'm going to present a different perspective to most others, a personal experience from my own work there as a doctor providing acute medical care. Now, I do talk very openly about the events, so I do need to warn you in advance that some of the images and the stories might be emotionally confronting. So on Boxing Day in North Sumatra around 20 years ago, a group of happy young kids were playing soccer near the beach. They had experienced an earthquake not long before, but were unaware of a large incoming surging wave offshore that was about to reach them and devastate not only their game, but their lives. Soon they heard a frightening noise and looked up and saw a wall of brown water racing towards them. They were frightened and started to run, but had no chance of avoiding it, and the wave hit them and they tried to swim, desperate. They looked for trees to hold on to, and I'll tell you in the second video in this series the moving story of what happened to these boys. The earthquake occurred about 200 kilometres off the Sumatran coast in the Indian Ocean and without any warning. And the news of the severity of the quake, which was 9.3 on the Richter scale, one of the highest on record, spread around the world. The tsunami that it generated ultimately travelled to all parts of the Indian Ocean at the speed of a passenger jet, rising to a height of 10 to 30 metres when it reached the shore, illustrated here. And just 20 minutes after the quake, the wave crashed into the villages along the coast of Aceh province in western Indonesia and hit the town of Malabo. This was the town closest to the epicentre, and it is the place where the boys were playing soccer and where I was mainly based on my 5 trips up there as a volunteer doctor. This wave had a total energy equivalent to 23,000 Hiroshima atomic bombs. It travelled 5 kilometres inland, destroying most of the building in its path, ultimately killing an estimated 228,000 people in 14 countries. We all first heard about the effects of the tsunami from the affected young tourists, who of course are better connected electronically. And we especially heard about, famous people who died, like the family of the Oscar-winning director of one of my favourite movies, Gandhi, Richard Attenborough, whose beloved daughter Jane and granddaughter Lucy both died. Also the AFL professional player, Australian Football League player, Troy Broadbridge. Overall, around 2,000 tourists died. But then the reports started to filter in from more remote areas of Indonesia about the size of the wave and the size of the catastrophe in terms of the deaths of thousands and thousands of Indonesians. This tsunami surged its way through thousands of Indonesian villages and towns, leaving a trail of misery, confusion, and grief. Why do so many people die in a tsunami? And sometimes I'm asked innocently by Aussies and others who are familiar with the skill of body surfing large waves, why not body surf a tidal wave? Well, let me quickly show you why this was impossible. It's not just water, but debris, cars, and lethal pieces of broken wood and metal. One school teacher who became a friend of our team was sitting in his car with his wife and daughters, represented in this illustration, and he was confused about what was happening, as you would expect. He became frightened, of course, but had no idea what to do to save his family, and why would he? Like everybody else, he'd never experienced anything like this before. And in the second video, I will tell you what decision he made for his family and what the outcome of that was. There had been no tsunami warnings because they come from Hawaii and are based on the Pacific Ring of Fire, but not the Indian Ocean. There is no warning system, and earthquakes and tsunamis almost never happen in that area. And in any case, who was there going to be at the end of a phone to take the information? So there was no warning of this tsunami. In any case, there was only 20 minutes between the earthquake and the tsunami smashing into the beach. Now, I'm from Perth, which is 4,000 kilometres distant, but is actually a neighbour of Aceh because it's right across the ocean. And in addition, I'm trained as a public health and tropical medicine doctor as well as a physician, so I had just the skills required to go and help. You might imagine that to love my neighbour, I immediately got on a plane and went up there. I did not. No, I said to myself, like some of you have and probably do, but I've got commitments. I'm sure someone else has got this. I've got commitments, but I'm sure someone else has got this. This is what we call in the Fathering Project the tray of buts. It stops me acting. Trouble is, disasters never happen at a convenient time. So I headed off with my family to go camping down at Augusta, a beautiful town in the southwest of Western Australia, seaside town. I was helping run at least a festival for kids. A few things happened. Firstly, the numbers of victims climbed steeply. Reports were coming in that the number of dead was in the tens of thousands, starting to get to me. And then one day I was at the ocean and looking over the ocean, and my eyes drifted northwest, and I thought, that's where Aceh is. We're separated by an ocean. Although it's a long way, theoretically I could just about see the shore. They are really my neighbour, and if I believe in loving thy neighbour, which I do, they truly are my neighbours. Yet here I am doing nothing. Then the next morning after breakfast, when all of this was playing on my mind, I went back to my tent and got the latest news from my radio. And when the ABC bulletin finished with the latest report, I heard something that disturbed me greatly. It said that 12,000 children were made instant orphans by the tsunami. They survived by swimming, but their parents and grandparents did not. They were all alone. I wept. 12,000 suddenly alone and desperate, and I imagined the scene. As a doctor, I've seen young parents die, leaving kids behind, but 12,000 at once. It broke my heart. And then I thought of the 1 million displaced survivors, all in grief, all having lost someone. So I decided to go and volunteer. It shouldn't have taken me so long to volunteer, but it did. I think it was that tray of butts again. So I immediately did two things. One is I rang a good friend of mine, Michael Henderson, who has a colleague in Indonesia who's involved in a not-for-profit, who were already working up in Aceh, and indeed whose team members had been among the very first to arrive in Aceh after the tsunami, and they helped by looking after patients in whatever shed they could find, working day and night in conditions that were really, really difficult. They said they would accept me on this team on one condition. I had to learn to speak Indonesian. They said they were just too busy and working too remotely at the coalface to have interpreters. So I said, okay, no problem. How hard can this be? So I walked out of my tent and I found a gorgeous lady who's in our church group down there called Angela. She's a lovely Indonesian, and she agreed to immediately start teaching me Bahasa Indonesian. Bless her. And then I contacted a medical friend and colleague of mine in Perth, Dr. Peter Graham. Now, Peter is one of the most inspiring heroes in my life, who had worked himself as a doctor in Indonesia for many years and spoke fluent Bahasa Indonesian. So I asked him to teach me medical Bahasa so I could function at the medical coalface up there, and he gave me a lot of time, and I learnt at such speed that my head used to hurt. Before I left to go to Aceh, I did have one slightly tense moment when the government put out an unprecedented warning about going to Aceh, some intelligence about the Bali bombers. And I got worried, not about the terrorists, but by the fact that the government might stop me going. So just in case, I didn't tell them I was going, and I entered Sumatra via Singapore. I also had a very tender moment. Just as I was leaving, my wonderful daughter Amy gave me a hug that lingered. A hug that lingered. I think she, like her mum, was a bit worried about me going. And on reflecting on this sort of moment, I realised that our kids are always watching what we do. I didn't realise that so much at the time. I didn't really think much of it. But those things do matter to kids. So I have made 3 videos on this disaster about the tsunami, the medical work, and then ways in which we can learn from that to volunteer. Now, why have I made these videos? For 2 reasons. One is to explain the disaster and the subsequent response, to honour them. And secondly, to encourage others to help in such situations in the future and give information to people on how they can actually do that. A lot of people want to, but they don't know what to do. Indeed, most people's hearts are moved with such events when they see them on the evening news, watching it or from their sofa, and they'd love to be able to get up and help. These videos will be especially useful then for such people and for 4 groups of people in particular who might wish to go to help in this sort of place. The first are health professionals, not only to help and do good, but to meet great people and gain experience in health in unusual and often exciting situations. The second group are parents and grandparents. Your kids and grandkids are watching what you do. They ask in their minds, does it match dad or grandma or mother or whatever, what you say? Does it match what you say? Are your values and beliefs about compassion and love genuine, or are they just talk? Those kids will follow in life what you do more than what you say, so do things that inspire those kids, and I'll discuss that more in the final episode. Thirdly, this is for anyone whose life has become a bit bland, a bit boring. You might love your work, or you might need re-energizing, and volunteering can lift your spirits, and this might be for you. Finally, interestingly, the last category is tourists. A week by a pool somewhere drinking cocktails is great for about a week, but it's becoming a bit trendy now to add another week to join an organisation that is helping poor communities up country, using your skills and help. Again, I'll tell you how to do that in the last of the 3 episodes. But there's a third reason for spending time making these videos, to be honest. It's so that when I'm gone, my grandkids and beyond that will have some record of something useful their grandfather or great-grandfather or whatever tried to do. And maybe they'll get some encouragement from it. So, to be honest, if no one watches these videos, it'll still be worth it for that possibility alone, that my grandkids and great-grandkids might watch it and become encouraged. But now, in the next episode, let me tell you about the devastation I saw and the work I did up in Aceh, from the visceral shock and horror to the dedicated work with some brilliant people and some of the most amazing, touching clinical stories I've ever heard in my many years as a doctor, including what happened to those young boys who were playing soccer near the beach, and what happened to that school teacher who was in the car with his family when the wave hit.